Welcome to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. The purpose of this podcast is to provide you with a candid conversation about our energy needs, our energy security, and your energy future. Texas oil and natural gas have made our nation the world's energy leader, constantly innovating and investing to fuel the economy, protect the environment, and power the world. This industry is fast-paced, high-tech, and essential to improving modern life. And we're here to talk about it. You're listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. Welcome to another episode of TXOGA Talks. I am joined today by Shana, Joyce, Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs at TXOGA.
Well, always happy to be here.
Glad that you're here. Look forward to a good conversation today, Shana. In November, TXOGA hosted its annual Lone Star Energy Forum. It's our annual meeting. It was at a really wonderful place at the Omni PGA Frisco Resort.
I wonder who picked that location.
Oh, how did that happen? It was really good. They did a super job. And the forum's agenda was super as well. Mm-hmm. We showcased really the global leadership that Texas oil and gas provides. And, you know, our companies are making the world cleaner, better, stronger each and every day, and we celebrated that.
And, you know, we got to hear about, we have a new administration coming in, and we got to hear from the 66th U.S. Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, which was really amazing to hear her conversation and hear her kind of views on where we are in this world compared to her experience in the past. And we also got to hear from Governor Abbott, which was also always great and gets you pumped up and ready for our upcoming legislative session.
Both of them did a wonderful job, really challenging the audience and the listeners that were there to think in a bigger, broader way about how to solve some of the challenges mm-hmm. that we face in Texas, in the United States, and around the world.
That's right. And to ensure that we continue to be a leader in energy and help make our world and the U.S. energy secure.
You know, the United States is in a very good position. We're bordered on the north by Canada, from the south by Mexico. North America has an opportunity to really have energy independence to the degree that we can interchange those assets. President Trump is talking about tariffs on mm-hmm. both Canada and Mexico. Yeah. We were fortunate because at our forum, we had a tremendous conversation that was led by the former ambassador to Mexico, Antonio Garza. Tony Garza signed my first certificate of election to office. He was Secretary of State of Texas at the time.
I love that.
But he did a super job. He was a county judge for Cameron County. He serves as counsel to the Mexico City office of White and Case, one of the world's leading global law firms. They've got 42 offices in 28 countries. And so Ambassador Garza was able to lead this panel, and it was called A New Administration and Mexico's Energy Industry. And he had some dynamic speakers that were there with him.
Yeah, so joining him, we had Carlos Garcia, who's Senior Vice President of Latin America Commercial Operations for Valero. And among his accomplishments is he's a leader in leadership position. He serves as president of the American Chambers in Mexico. So that's pretty cool.
He was.
So we were also pleased to have Francisco de Rosenzweig, who serves as a partner at White & Case. And he was also the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade at the Ministry of the Economy for Mexico. That's a big title right there.
Yeah, it is.
And so when he was there, he led Mexico's international trade negotiations on issues such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Pacific Alliance Trade Initiative, and negotiated bilateral investment treaties and represented Mexico's interests before the World Trade Organization.
It was a dynamic panel
yes.
and a really good conversation. And the importance is Mexico is Texas' biggest trading partner. Mm-hmm. And so, folks, you have a new administration in Mexico. You've got a new administration in the United States. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation, and we're glad to be able to bring it to you today. So we'll take you to that conveation now.
Let me thank you for that introduction and for the invitation to be part of TXOGA. It had been, I hate to admit it, had been nearly 30 years since my last TXOGA event. It was in the context of a campaign all those years ago. And I've already run into a number of people that helped elect me in 1998, and I hope they don't regret having done that. But it was great to be with everyone last night. What Todd didn't tell you is I'm moderating the panel, which is a little bit like being your caddy. My job is to show up, keep up, and shut up, and hand it over to our to our panelists this morning. Let me try to give you a quick kind of overview, kind of a scene setter on Mexico. Todd hit the high points, I think, very well in terms of our largest trading partner, the impact that we've long felt and sensed, both positive and the challenges that Mexico presents here in Texas. We feel it historically and culturally and economically. But one of the great, I think, opportunities that present itself, and you heard a little bit about it from the economist Forsman this morning, I think Secretary Dr. Rice will probably speak to it certainly more profoundly than I can, is the geopolitics opportunities that Mexico presents. There's a word that's being bandied about quite a bit, and it's nearshoring. Mm-hmm. Well, really, that's a nice way of saying there's a geopolitical opportunity in Mexico, largely because of the competition or rivalry or occasionally conflicts that we have with China, which is unlikely to change in the near term. What's going on in the Middle East obviously presents some challenges as it relates to logistics and the movements of. What we're seeing in Eastern Europe has presented some challenges to the movement of goods. And certainly in the wake of the pandemic, we all sort of became experts on supply chains and the need for resiliency and redundancy and being near the markets that you were trying to get to. And in that context, I think the base case for Mexico remains very positive. And therefore, our ability to work closely in the context of North America is particularly important at this time. Domestically, yes, some real challenges. I think much like the rest of the world coming out of 2020, Mexico saw a contraction of nearly double digits, about 8.5% contraction in their economy. There's been a bit of a bounce back. And the bounce back has been on the back of manufacturing and exports, healthy remittances flowing from around the world, but largely the United States, to the tune of about $55 or $60 billion a year, which has maintained, a nice current accounts and really bolstered the consumer there in Mexico. And they've had really, I think, some very sound macroeconomic policies. They survived the pandemic. I think there were probably a number of opportunities lost over the last 6 years with the administration that hit pause on much of the energy reform that I think had created some optimism for many in this room about the country. But they're moving generally in the right direction. But what drives the Mexican economy, as is true really around the world, is the United States economy. And we are, as Todd alluded to, the single largest trading partner. Here in Texas, I guess this morning the number thrown out was 4.5 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas that goes to Mexico. And I have to imagine a lot of that is produced right here in the great state. So this relationship is important. In June, Mexico elected Claudia Sheinbaum, the first woman elected president in that country. She is the successor to López Obrador, who was a man of the left, an authoritarian man of the left that hit pause on the energy. A lot of interesting commentary about her. As is the case every 12 years, however, both the United States and Mexico have elections in the same cycle. So this presents, I think, a very real opportunity to assess the relationship, get a sense of where the opportunities are, as well as the challenges. Hence the panel this morning. So it's a very interesting time. And you have two people, Francisco de Rosenzweig, who, in addition to being the managing director and partner at White & Case in Mexico City, has negotiated those trade agreements, but more recently has been a strategic and advisor and counselor to a number of multinationals, many of them U.S., during that renegotiation of USMCA, and has the kind of insights that I think are helpful in terms of moving into Mexico and doing business there. What Carlos, the introduction, didn't mention is in his role as president of the United States Chamber of Commerce in Mexico, he really has represented a broad array of industries. And I would say there are very few people that have had as many high-level meetings in the transition with leaders within the new administration as you have. So we're looking forward to some insights there. With that, let me go to Carlos, and we can talk a bit about those insights.
Sure.
Claudia Sheinbaum, a new president of Mexico. What can we anticipate? How will she distinguish herself from her predecessor, and what might that mean for energy and Texas going forward?
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here with you with the TXOGA. This is the first time I've ever been to an event like this with you all, so it's a real pleasure. I think it's really important to understand, what's to come in the next 6 years, understanding where she comes from. So, you mentioned Lopez Obrador, the prior president, being a leftist. She actually is even farther left. But she's highly educated. She has a PhD. She did PhD work at Cal Berkeley and Stanford. I know what you all are thinking, but that's how she's leaning that way, and so we have to understand that. And the one thing that distinguishes her administration from the prior administration is exactly what you said. In the last month and a half, she's been president of Mexico. I've had more meetings with high-level cabinet people in the executive branch than I've had in the last 6 years under the prior administration. The prior administration really viewed private companies as sort of the enemy, very much consolidated. Some of those policies will continue. If we really look at the energy space, part of her PhD dissertation was about energy transition. So she will be pushing that. They will be part of her agenda, mainly focused on the power side. Looking on the power side, I think that she's pragmatic enough to understand the importance of Pemex and the oil industry in Mexico that really drives the economy today. But it is going to be something that's top of mind. So when you think about that, it could be that she's much more open at looking at biofuels, at electromobility in the public transportation space, most likely. But a couple of things, in fact, last week and this week, they announced sort of their high-level energy plan, which, by the way, is a good sign, because in the prior administration, there really was no holistic energy plan. And she is looking forward, trying to take advantage of this opportunity that you mentioned about nearshoring. And if I think about sort of some overarching themes that she brings up in her plan is, one, energy sovereignty. And she uses that word often, not necessarily energy security, which is interesting. So, which means that she's going to still continue to focus on protecting the state-owned companies, CFE on the power side and Pemex on the oil and gas side. Having said that, she does realize the challenges are huge in the energy space and that she needs private companies. I'll let Francisco talk about a little bit of the regulatory changes that are occurring. And so right now the issue is, how will we be able to play in the space? But the opportunities are massive across the board. You mentioned natural gas imports from Texas into Mexico. The figure's actually a little bit higher. It's about 6.5, 6.6 BCF. And if you look on the power side, they're looking to add about 7.5 gigawatts of natural gas-fired cogen facilities, which means that natural gas is going to come out of Texas, most likely. Probably going to add another 1.5 BCF. They're adding infrastructure into the southeast part of the country where they haven't had access to natural gas, and so that'll increase another, probably half a BCF of gas. They're going to focus on trying to produce more natural gas in Mexico, but the challenges are huge. The reality is that Texas stands to be a big winner in what it is in the export and sale of natural gas. Mm-hmm. That's sort of.
But let me kind of play off that a little bit and pivot towards Francisco. I'm a CEO of a U.S. company. I walk into your office and I said, I was listening to Carlos Garcia. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity in Mexico. But I just read this piece on Claudia Sheinbaum, and she's talking about Pemex and the parastatal and the primacy of the sovereign in the energy space. Navigate that difference for me. For the political landscape, what does it look like? Regulatory. How do you advise somebody that's looking at the market or somebody that's in it that wants to mitigate their exposure?
Thank you. Thanks, Todd. Thank you to TXOGA for the invitation. Well, Tony, it's a great question. It's important to remind that back in 2013, we had a major constitutional reform in the energy space, something that we were looking for maybe a couple of decades. So during the administration of Peña Nieto, it was like a booming in the energy space. With former President López Obrador, with AMLO, there was a different view about the level of the private participation in the energy space. And it's true that there is a large exposure from U.S. corporations in the oil and gas industry, not that much in the power side. It's more European corporations. So it was interesting how while we were renegotiating the USMCA back in 1919 with former Presidents López Obrador and President-elected Mr. Trump. So on the positive side, you have already an agreement that was renegotiated by Trump after 25 plus years. So how to navigate the current policies with Sheinbaum, the new president that has been in place for the last month, it's hard to tell, but on the positive side, Tony, it's important to bear in mind that a set of large constitutional reforms were sent back by López Obrador back on February the 5th. Most of them have been already approved in a time record. So the energy space, talking about power, and the regulation that will be applicable in the future for the SOEs that you were referring, Pemex and CFE, we're going to learn about that maybe in a couple of weeks. They are passing constitutional reforms in a very expedited manner. As you may be aware, Sheinbaum has a supermajority in the lower house and the Senate. So this allows her to pass all the different amendments to the Constitution in order to push forward her agenda in the energy space. So thinking in that, I do believe that by the end of the year, we'll have a clear understanding about the new design and organization of the SOEs in the energy space, particularly talking about Pemex. I think that that's where we have larger opportunities for the private sector, because as opposed to what any Mexican will thought about it, the oil and gas industry were not that an issue for López Obrador, as opposed to the renewable projects. In the case of the renewable project, there was a major opposition from López Obrador he's not believing in climate change. So most of the renewable projects faces a lot of challenges from the regulatory point of view. So this is something that, as Carlos was referring to, a couple of weeks ago, Sheinbaum announced the policy for the power industry and for the oil and gas industry a couple of days ago. This was a general presentation. We need to learn about the implemental legislation. But what is true is that I think that we're in much better shape than we used to be with López Obrador, and particularly because the regulators are working again as regulators. I do believe that we have a predictability, and having Trump being elected as president of the U.S. will help us also to have some check and balances in the bilateral relationship. Because it's true that Sheinbaum has the control of the Congress, of course, of the executive, and there is also an important influence in the legislative branch. So I do believe that all the new regulation will be in place by the end of the year. And it's clear that we have a lack of infrastructure. Yeah. It's clear that we don't have strong public finances. So there is an increasing need to have foreign investment, and having the USMCA in place is something that makes us and keep us attractive.
Yeah. Let me, Carlos, just to play off something that Francisco said about the regulatory bodies. There's an old, I guess, expression or saying that budget is policy. And once you get out in the regulatory sort of environment, many times personnel is policy. How would you score or rate Sheinbaum's initial sort of appointments in key positions, without getting too into the weeds as to the names, but just in a general sense at the regulatory bodies, at the parastatals, any sense of a willingness or a disposition as a practical matter to open up opportunities to the private sector?
Yeah, good comment or good question. For sure, it's a step change. The prior administration at key cabinet positions were more friends, I would say, and allies. She's taken a much more technical approach to this. If you look at key positions in energy, in economy, in the foreign ministry, these are very seasoned technocrats, I would say. So at the executive branch, there's it's very much stronger, much stronger. And there seems to be an openness for dialogue and understanding the challenges and opportunities and taking a much more methodical approach to solving the problems, which is very, very good. The prior administration was very visceral. Details didn't matter. They were very dogmatic. She definitely, like I said, she does have a leftist tint, but because of her scientific background, she's approaching it that way. And the folks that she has reflect that. So if you look, for example, the state-owned companies, one, the head of the CFE, which is the power company, the new head is a woman that's been at the CFE for 25 years. Technical person, understands the challenges, understands what needs to happen, so it's very, very good. The head of Pemex, although not a lot of experience on the operations side, it comes from academia. She's a close ally to the president, but he's very knowledgeable about the industry as well. And then the new Secretary of Energy, again, they all work very, very well together. They're very well coordinated, which is sometimes unusual. The prior administration, the head of energy didn't see eye to eye with a finance minister who didn't see eye to eye with the head of Pemex. This group is very cohesive. You have a meeting with them, and they look like they're all talking about off the same script. And they all say, we want private investment. We need the involvement of private companies. So that's all, I think, very, very positive.
Yeah. Francisco, one of the things that I think when investors are looking at a market like Mexico, they talk about political risk and certainty and rule of law. One of the things that I think gives certainly investors and people across the country some level of comfort is the trade agreement as sort of the outer boundary, almost like the political risk insurance is USMCA because it's out there. You've both negotiated agreements on the country's behalf and represented individual companies in the context of the USMCA. My question is twofold, and I think for the benefit of all of us. In the last electoral cycle here in the United States, now President-elect Trump talked about beginning the renegotiation on day one and implying a certain level of tariffs would be imposed to bring, I think the expression was Mexico to bear, or to heal, I think, on some of these issues. First, what is the actual timetable that was laid out in USMCA in terms of review, and how does a review markedly distinguish itself from a renegotiation? Is it a separate process? And that'd be part A. And then part B is, what do you contemplate in this new environment in terms of what will be noise and what will be signal and what will be sign kind of thing? What should we listen to and what should we discount?
Yeah, well, as opposed to what many of us think, that the sunset review will take place on June 2026, the truth is the process will be triggered by the last quarter of 2025. USTR must issue a notice to receive comments about this process, the sunset review. And I would say that on one side, having, as I said, Mr. Trump negotiated the USMCA, I think that's positive. No? On the other hand, it's true that after 4 years, there's been some issues where we can do better as a region. For instance, when we had the pandemic, one of the most important criticisms that I made is that Mexico was not aligned to the policies that the US and Canada had, for instance, in the industry, in the automotive industry, no, or in the oil industry or power industry. So I do believe that this kind of lack of alignment in public policies is going to be reviewed in this process. This process, as is stable or established in the agreement, the three parties must express their interest to continue with the agreement for another 16 years. If one of the parties fails to issue or express that interest by the last day of June 2026, then that party will have a phase-out period of 10 years. That doesn't mean that they cannot reconsider within that term, which is not the best scenario because you will face some uncertainty within the region. Having said that, there's been some issues with Mexico and the U.S. in the sense that, for instance, the policies that López Obrador back in 21-22, in the view of the U.S. and Canadian authorities, were not in compliance with the USMCA, which I share, by the way. And the truth is that there are some other issues such as yellow corn, the automotive role of origin, and some other issues that are in the bucket list or in the basket that will be reviewed definitely in the 21st half of 2026. So, but on the other side, it's important just to bear in mind that, as you mentioned, we are the most important trading partner to the U.S. And it is true that our economies are highly integrated, not only when we talk about energy, when we talk about manufacturing industries, but also in the ag industry. And I'm going to share a percentage that maybe is a bit simpler, but more efficient or effective to understand the Mexican needs in terms of natural gas. Over 90% of our needs are supplied by the U.S., the southern part of Texas. Mm-hmm. Instead of talking BCF, 90% of Mexico is being supplied by you guys. Yeah.
West Texas and South Texas.
So imagine the importance that the agreement has. Mm-hmm. So when the NAFTA agreement was negotiated and the renegotiation of NAFTA nowadays to USMCA, China was not an issue for Mexico. Mexico was part of the solution. Mexico almost didn't have any relationship with the Chinese industries, authorities. Now we are receiving some investment from Chinese corporations in the renewable space, in the automotive industry, midstream and downstream. So this is something that is going to play in the process of renegotiation. And I do believe that will be fine, but I'm not sure if we're going to be able to keep the free trade, duty-free tariffs across the region in North America. Maybe we're going to see some quotas or some tariffs for some goods that comes, the input from China in Mexico or Canada. And maybe that is going to be a difference. As you know, in Mexico, we have this facility that is being built by Mr. Musk, Tesla. And we were waiting, or they were waiting for the outcome of the U.S. election. So I think that there's going to be a shift on the way of the negotiation will take place. Again, China was not a part of the discussions with Mexico. Now I think it's going to be. I think it's not only about increasing the content of the rule of origins. I think it's going to be tougher inspections and toughest measures in order to protect our region, our markets, and how, as Mr. Trump said many times, bring back investment and the workforce to North America.
Yeah. You know, one of the impressive things, Carlos, in the getting to USMCA, and I made the comment at the time that neither López Obrador or Donald Trump were what you would characterize as committed free traders. They simply weren't. And so when we went into that last negotiation, there was a level of anxiety about whether we could get to the end of a negotiation. And ultimately we did, and I think it's a very solid agreement. But probably, and you've got to give a lot of credit to the role of the private sector, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Mexico, which the three of us serve as directors, was very active, both in representing U.S. interests within Mexico, U.S. interest in Washington, explaining what the situation on the ground was, but was also a very important interlocutor back to the Mexican government. Mm-hmm. Tell me how under your leadership, how you're preparing and positioning the AmCham de Mexico to play that role again, because I do think it was critical that the private sector was out making the case so well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we try to get out from underneath the political rhetoric and really focus on the economics and the economic impact of the free trade agreement and the impact it has on everyday citizens in both sides of the border. So through the American Chamber, what we're looking to is just foster further investment, foster further integration for North America for the benefit of both countries. And the way we've been working, the way just high level, the way the AmCham works in Mexico, we have 30 committees that talk about, topics of, rule of law, human resources, how do you develop human capital. And so instead of being an organization that criticizes, I've always had bosses that have said, hey, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And that's what we've been focused on. So we were the first organization that published sort of a working paper, 2024-2030 for the next administration that identified those industries that are key for the further integration and those that have huge opportunities, semiconductors, the ag industry, medical devices, automotive clearly, and then identifying those barriers to investment and then develop solutions around those barriers to investment, whether it be the need for power, the need for water, the need for security, human capital development. And so it's really a working structure. And we do that obviously with the context we have in Mexico, but the fact that a lot of our members also have presence in Washington, Valero, I think we have a team of 6 people in Washington. And so we're using those connections as well to spread the word about the importance and the opportunities that are present. So.
And you really can't start early enough.
We've started already.
Yeah.
In fact, we were just talking about, we were in Washington in February. This document that we published for the incoming administration, we published in last year, June of last year, which we shared with all the presidential candidates. And so now what we're doing is taking that document and matching it up with the government's stated goals for the next 6 years and finding those common grounds.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, I want to allow 10 minutes for Q&A, and I'm seeing where we're right at 10 minutes, and I will also share with you that we're trying to keep this tight, because the only thing more difficult than talking before a happy hour is having to be off the stage in time for Dr. Rice. So why don't we go to the Q&A
I thought they were all here to see us.
Yeah, no. Let's go to Q&As. Do we have something from the audience? I'm imagining we'll get something on security and maybe what advice would you have that would allow for further integration of Texas and Mexico? But well, Carlos, why don't you jump in on security real quick? Yeah. Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, on some of the security-related stuff. One, as it relates to the individual company security, and I think more broadly we can talk about security and cooperation, or I can certainly try to do something.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, security is one of the issues. I agree with Francisco that China is going to be one of the big topics of the negotiations. Security is the other, and immigration are the 2 issues that are really hot points on both sides of the border. And security, I mean, if you look at the members of the AmCham, for example, we conduct a survey every year among our members to see about security issues, and it's pretty telling when you see that about 60 or 63% of the companies spend anywhere between 2 and 10% of their operating expenses on security matters, personnel, technology, you name it. So it's a cost of doing business in Mexico, right? And then when you look at the issues at the cross border, and we know Texas has done that on several occasions. Because of security concerns, have closed the borders. And that interrupts trade. And when you talk about the level of trade between the 2 countries, that this year is estimated to be about $820 billion, and you think that there's about 1 million people that cross the border every single day legally, about 580 or 600,000 trucks cross the border every single day, and countless number of unit trains moving goods back and forth. So interruptions at the border for 1, 2, or 3 days can be catastrophic in supply chains. And so it's a big issue that has to be dealt with. And we've been trying to work with the Mexican government from the AmCham perspective to create safe passages to the border. I think there's some opportunities to leverage technology to allow legal commerce to accelerate across the border, because any delays are delays, and time is money. And so leveraging those. And so those are some opportunities, and it is going to be a topic that we're going to have to tackle.
Okay, let's go to the audience again. I know this is not a bashful bunch. Is it just too early? Or was it just too late last night?
Just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you if you have a question.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Recently, there was an amendment memorialized on the 1944 Water Treaty. I don't expect you to have the granularity in that. The amendment without enforcement, because we've been here in the past, our agricultural sector in the valley specifically are harmed, sometimes irreparably, into perpetuity, running business. What is the proper leverage for the U.S. to make them enforce their component of releasing water under that treaty? Do you have any ideas? Because truthfully, being in those conversations with these negotiations for a while, it appears that they tell us exactly what we want. Now it's memorialized, but we have no way of making them release water when water needs to be released. So what's your perspective on having the government, the new administration, actually having our attention when we need that water delivered? And just background, I deal with water in Texas, so that's kind of my background. But good step in the way with the memorialization of some of the ideas that have been discussed in writing, but at the same time, no enforcement provisions. And so where do you guys see this administration, as well as Texas, having more leverage with those memorializations?
Anybody want to? I'll take a small whack at it, largely because I was around that water issue as a county judge in South Texas and recognized that one of the recent casualties was the sugar mill in South Texas and contributed significantly to the employment down there. That treaty has been in place since 1944, has been amended any number of times by minute order, and it always seems to be amended just in time to kind of dodge a political bullet. And then the oldest strategy in the world kicks in, and that's pray for rain. And you get just enough inflows to kind of put that back on the back burner for about a year, 18 months or whatever. The most recent activity on it is encouraging, but it's kind of an accounting sleight of hand without much of an enforcement mechanism. And so I will tell you, and at the risk of, and I don't imagine there's any media here, but at the risk of making news, the lack of resolve lies in both capitals, largely because it is, in the U.S., it is perceived as a first-tier issue amongst the Texas group, but not a first-tier issue in terms of the larger context of issues between the United States and Mexico. It is perceived as an issue of placating the political interest in northeastern Mexico, which are their ag interest as well, and not wanting to inflame those. So it is generally, how can we manage it until it rains and have some minute orders that kind of placate the moment. And I know that sounds cynical, but if I hadn't seen it play out that way for 30 some odd years now, I don't think I'd feel comfortable saying that in an open forum.
Yeah.
Okay, any silver bullets? If you were advising Francisco on, in terms of Texas, things that we can be doing with Mexico for further integration of those energy markets, are there things at the border, are there logistics sort of things that are talked about in the context of trade that have been talked about but not done, that might be considered at this point by the new administrations?
Well, I think that we need more infrastructure. The truth is that the points of the crossing points are almost the same since many years ago. And one of the issues that Mexico and Texas are in the process of the bid is the nearshoring. So Mexico is facing a lack of power and water supply in your case, I guess it's only water supply rather than power. So I do believe that the relationship with Texas and the U.S. As a whole, with Mexico, is an intense relationship, Tony. So being the most important trading partner for Mexico, the U.S., and the other way around, this means that we have a lot of opportunities, and as any relationship, sometimes it gets too intense. We should not be afraid of, but it's true that during this sunset review process, we're going to have a lot of opportunities maybe to align certain concerns, certain issues such as water, some other issues about migration. Over the time, trade negotiations were not mixed with any other issue. It was like a trade channel, and that's all. With Trump, that changed. As you remember, we had over 20 or 25,000 Army guys in the border to contain all the migration flows from Central America to Mexico and the U.S. So I do believe that with the review of the USMCA, migration is going to be again an important issue. And we may have an agreement that is not only trade and investment anymore. Maybe it's going to be broader, as some other issues or trades agreements that Mexico has, for instance, with Europe, that has a pillar of human rights, trade, investment. And in the case of Mexico, US, and Canada, why not think about a third pillar that is more related to workforce and migratory security issues? No? So I do believe that there is a lot of opportunities, but the main challenge is to align the public policies. If we do, or we are able to do that as a region, then the integration will be further and the region will be even stronger in other markets.
All right, we've got 27 seconds. Glass half full or half empty on the U.S.-Mexico and Texas relationship?
Full.
Completely full, good. Carlos?
I would agree. I mean, my wife will tell you that I always see life through rose-colored glasses. I'm very optimistic. I think the opportunities are huge, and I think the two countries working together will be able to solve the problems and really maximize these opportunities. So, and I think the Mexican administration, again, time will tell. In 6 years, maybe we'll sit down and say, what happened the last 6 years. But if I compare it to prior administration, it's a big change.
I think at the start of two new administrations, we should be encouraged. If there ever was a time for optimism, I think it's now, because I opened with the base case. The geopolitical realities will not change anytime soon, nor are Mexico and Texas going anywhere. And we've had a long-standing and wonderful relationship that I think is worthy of the hard work that it'll take to build on. And I know TXOGA and your members will be a part of that, as they always have. So thank you for having us this morning, and all the best.
So that was an interesting conversation. Talked a lot about regulatory certainty and kind of more relationship building that could happen in this new administration, both in Mexico and with the Trump administration coming in. I
think it's a new day when you have administration changes in both countries, kind of reset and start fresh. And here's the thing. Everybody wants their neighbors to do well. If you're concerned about the border, and a lot of people are in this country, if the economy in Mexico is doing better and we have trade that's facilitated with more certainty, I think you'll see conditions improve all the way around.
That's right.
So to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight.
The views expressed on this podcast are not intended and should not be construed to be the views of any particular TXOGA member or company. The purpose of this podcast is to engage in candid conversations about energy needs, energy security, and the future of energy.